You can see my back.
Okay. You are not ready at all, David. Welcome, everybody, to Gaming with C21.
Yeah, welcome. This is exciting. It's our first ever stream like this. Well, we did have like Mark Money up here apparently like 5 years ago, but that wasn't a series. That was an event.
Sure, yeah.
But this semester we're doing a new series called Gaming with C21 that's going to be all about kind of highlighting our mother organization, our parental organization, the people who give us this room.
Right, the cabal.
The cabal, yeah. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement, and then we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll start playing some Hades, and we'll talk with our guests today about all the cool work they do with the Center for 21st Century Studies. All right, so our land acknowledgement here at UWM, this is our official one through the Electric Quinney Institute here on campus. We acknowledge that in Milwaukee, we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, which is part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. So that is our land acknowledgement here at UWM. If you have more questions about it or want to learn more, you can Google UWM Electric Quinney Institute, and there's lots of great resources there about land acknowledgements and things to go beyond land acknowledgements. All right, so my name is David Kutchik. I am a third year, PhD student here. I guess I'm a candidate, PhD candidate, dissertator, whatever you want to say, here in the English department, and I'm in a plan called Media, Cinema, and Digital Studies. I am being co-hosted by...
this guy off screen.
Yes.
I'm Ryan House. I'm also a PhD candidate in Media, Cinema, and Digital Studies at UWM. And we study games together separately, and separately together.
Yeah.
You know, that's we just all hang out around this stream, this Twitch channel, and learn about games.
We're all usually
in the world.
We're just somewhere within the 9 floors of our building. Yeah. And we are joined today by Randolph Marcum, right?
Yes.
Or Randolph. Okay.
Randolph Marcum. The third.
The third.
Third.
As it is on your nameplate.
It's the best nameplate I've ever had.
Yeah. So what do you do?
What's my deal? What's my deal?
Yeah.
What's my deal? All right. So yeah, I can do you more than twice better. I am a 7th year PhD candidate in the English department. I am in the literature and cultural theory track, and part of what I study is video games. So here I am.
Exciting.
And I work at C21 as a project assistant. I help with a lot of various projects, I would say. And I'm here to play a game, have some fun, have a little conversation.
Chat. Yes. So you have chosen Hades. You've chosen Hades. So what about, why did you want to choose Hades? Other than I didn't know what to choose, so I just chose it.
Sure. Well, it's 2 reasons, actually. The first reason is that I recently got a PS5, and this is one of the first games I got. And
fancy.
I have been playing it quite a bit. Through, I think, the first, half of the main story. I've beaten Dad, Hades, enough times, so Mom's back in the underworld. Spoiler alert, by the way.
I'm spoiled. Actually, I've never beaten Hades.
Oh, jeez.
I'm not very good at this game.
You have to.
So
I like
sorry.
it.
You have to
Boy,
beat it
it's
10
not
times
hard.
to get it right.
You have to beat it 10 times.
Yeah.
So I've been playing it a lot. So I looked at this in part as an opportunity to play the game even more and get paid for it. And I guess in part too because
Clearly, people did not talk to his people.
I have to leave. But before I do leave, I would also say that another reason I picked this game is because it does actually hit on a lot of the kind of theoretical concerns and kind of I guess just principles that I'm kind of dealing with in my own work regarding anticipation and kind of how a game or how really any piece of technology or media makes people feel or makes people think about the future.
Cool.
So I think this is even though I don't talk about it in my own dissertation, because I'm mostly working with 80s and 90s video games, I think this is actually a really good kind of like modern example of kind of like how that works, or how it can work.
That's awesome. That is so cool.
Yeah, let's try it then.
Yeah,
let's go.
I'm excited to hear.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started.
We'll keep an eye on chat if anybody pops in and wants to ask questions or make
we're
fun
playing
of
some
us.
Hades.
Oh yeah,
so we're going with the bow.
We are going with the bow.
Okay.
Particularly the aspect of Chiron. So it's going to make it to where my special arrows will home in on the last thing that I hit.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
Yeah. So see that.
I'm always drawn to the bow too, but I never got that move.
Yeah, the bow is really fun.
And the Chiron makes it a little quicker, right?
Yes, it does make it a little quicker. You can still power shot like I just did on Skelly there. And it'll come back in a second. Here we go. Yeah. So lots of fun. I went with just over here. I went with the adamant arrowhead. So I'm trying to fish for an Artemis build to get like really big crits. I like big numbers in games. So that's very big numbers. Big numbers. We'll just go with 0 heat for now, but we'll see what we can do in the future here. So let's see what we can do here. All right.
Hopefully get some Artemis.
All right.
There we go.
So does she have what I need? Okay. This isn't exactly what I was looking for, but
I when I play it, I don't do the aspects like as much, which I need to do more of. But
okay. I say, well,
I do like. Is Artemis your favorite? Like boons then are through Artemis, or?
Oh yes, certainly. Artemis I think is useful for pretty much any build that you're aiming for in this game. Because first of all, she has again just really good kind of like crit abilities, so you can just deal a lot of damage really fast if you get lucky enough, which is in itself kind of anticipatory, right? You're kind of fishing for kind of like this like big kind of like it's like big kind of like number, right? However, she also works really well with other gods that you can find in this game. So, for example, the one that I'm going for in this playthrough, I'm going to attempt to go for an Aphrodite Artemis build. So, Aphrodite has an ability that you can apply to people called Weak, which eventually, if you do it right, if you do it right, you can deal. You have like a higher chance to deal critical damage to. You have a higher chance to deal critical damage to enemies that are affected by your weak, and it will also have like a higher chance as well. So you can deal a lot of damage just very quickly if we get it, and that's part of the kind of like appeal of this game, right? Is that you don't actually know what you're going to go for, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go for piercing volley here. So every run is a little bit different, but you're still kind of like trapped in this like experience, or this feeling, I guess I should say, of wanting to kind of like tilt the odds in your favor, and you're always like wondering like, okay, if this happens, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
If I get like this thing that I don't really want, how am I going to kind of respond to it? Yeah, I hate these things.
Yeah. In Thomas Malaby terms, it's like emergent, right? It's like you kind of have a structure already that you know that generally, this is how things are going to go. It's structured enough to where you understand generally how it works, right? And there's certain things that are going to happen, right? There's a boss fight at the end of every level. There's going to be mini boss, et cetera, right? But you have just enough variation to it where things can emerge kind of out of this structure that gives you anticipation, for example.
Exactly. And I think another kind of like big part of that too, to use another kind of like Malaby terms, it's contingent, right?
Yeah,
it's very much contingent on what you're able to find, where you're able to find it, when you're able to find it, because I can go into this and I'm like, oh, I want to build a, Artemis and Aphrodite build. Well, the game might not actually cooperate. Yeah. And if it doesn't, you have to kind of like, you have to respond to that, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to give it to me now? Not yet. That's okay. We'll go with Hunter's Mark. Still getting some good Artemis spoons, but
not as the ones you would like.
Not the one I would like right now. I'm aiming for the special one because with Chiron, it'll launch out this big kind of flurry, and eventually, if you get the right Artemis spoon, any kind of special move that you put out is going to be able to do a lot of critical damage. So if you're launching 8 of these things, every 8 of those are going to have a 15 or 20% chance to crit, which can deal tons of damage just very quickly.
Yeah. And then you can pair it up with other abilities. There was one where if you get a critical hit, that target's marked, right? And then that means they're more likely to get another critical hit, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can just stack and stack and stack.
Stack and stack and stack. And that's what this game is really all about, is it's kind of trying to stack the odds kind of in your favor that you're going to get the thing that you want, right? Which is another example of how this game is kind of training you to think about anticipation and kind of thinking about how do you kind of essentially how do you master the environment that you kind of find yourself in, right? Which is great, I think, for this game, because that's also the theme of the game, right? Is, you are kind of doing the same thing repeatedly, just again and again and again, trying to get better at it, trying to escape, but never actually being able to escape at the same time, right? Anticipation in games, I think, works very similarly to that. Okay.
Yeah, I almost kind of think of it too, you were saying, you never really arrive at the ending. And I feel like that happens with a lot of games. Even adventure games, for example. I'm just thinking of Legend of Zelda, because I'm going to be writing about it. Right, but you defeat Ganon, but then you can never actually experience the world that exists after you defeat the villain. Right? It's you can only...
You reload right before
the final boss fight, right? Because there's no way to experience that world. And this...
Because what is that world?
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing to do there.
Yeah, and this procedurally, kind of takes care of that. Also narratively. By being you can't escape hell.
Right. You're here forever, so you might as well try to make it as good as you can.
And it's like that South Park joke when one of them dies, and it's where am I going to go?
Yeah.
I'm already in hell. You can die as much as you want. It makes sense that you just end up right where you started.
Right. It doesn't matter.
I love the blade rifts. Those are one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I adore Ares in this game. He's just almost always extremely useful for almost any build.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So you're part of the, I can't remember exactly your terminology for it, but it was the literature and theory?
Cultural theory.
So just sort of thinking about all of the different lenses that it's possible to study video games through, where do you see your sort of, I guess, institutional training, as a literature scholar / cultural theorist, sort of coming into play with your study of games? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, basically I think I get that. So I think for me, probably what it always comes back down to for me, just in terms of my own kind of institutional relationship and where I'm bringing cultural theory into it, is that's a good question.
Yeah. We can.
It does not have to be deep.
No, it does not have to be deep.
It can float around in the air too. Maybe we can come back to it if you need time to process it. It just sort of, I heard you talking, and I've studied literature too. Both my undergrad and masters were basically in literature, and then came here to do something else because they offered the media, cinema, and digital studies. And so, I guess I'm just curious how you feel your study, sort of the ways that you've been trained in studying literature, are applied, maybe, or maybe what you feel like they bring to your perspective on video games, maybe.
Yeah. there's this I forget who it was exactly, but I was reading this theorist that basically said that when we're looking at a video game, what we're ultimately doing is we're reading to and responding to code, right? Mm-hmm. So I definitely agree with that. And I think for me, when I think of like reading, I think of like close reading. So I think that's probably the first thing I would say, is that I am very much interested in kind of like, applying this like close reading practice to actual kind of like computer and game code.
Now you say actual code. Mm-hmm. Do you mean actual code?
I do mean.
Or do you mean the metaphorical representations on the screen?
Oh, I do mean actual code.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so part of what I'm doing in my dissertation is I'm looking at like, the code, for example, of like the original Pac-Man game, and kind of like how these ghosts are kind of like responding to these players based on their coding, and kind of like how they are always moving in relation to the player based on kind of like their coded behaviors and coded like patterns, right? And it looks, for all intents and purposes, like it's random, but it is in fact not. In fact, nothing in a game is ever truly random. So I think that is part of like what I'm looking at there, is that I'm trying to think about like, okay, how do I read kind of like the code of this game? So that's probably first. The other thing is, just as a cultural theorist, I'm very interested in things that are, I'll say, as I get Aphrodite here, so I'm very interested in things that are commonplace, that are everyday.
Yeah.
Raymond Williams, who was a very famous kind of like cultural theorist in like 50s and 60s England. Got a fish real quick. Noted that culture is in fact made up of things that occur in the everyday, right? That we can't look at kind of like exceptional kind of things and be like, oh, okay, well, this is the subject of our study. We have to focus on things that people encounter in their everyday life. And video games, I think, are very much a part of that kind of like ambient culture that he describes. On a more personal level, I have had a very kind of like long, rich history of playing games and just being fascinated by them. So wanting to kind of like study them, in a more kind of like, I'll say, official capacity, rather than just like, I like them, I like playing them, but just wanting to like, learn as much as I can about them, and kind of like how to think about them and what they might say about kind of like people's relationships with technology, with feelings, things like that.
So you've been playing games like since you were a kid, or?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I think.
What was your first system, or not to like pigeonhole you into home consoles, but I'm assuming it was a home console.
It
based
was
on your parent age.
It was, yeah. So.
In my game they're dating. So.
Oh yeah, in my game too. In my game, Zagreus is dating everyone that he can, at least.
Yeah, for sure he's dating Megra and Than. Mm-hmm. So.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. So what you're saying?
First system.
First system. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first system I remember playing was actually an Atari at my grandparents' house.
Wow.
So it goes back. Yeah. They had the original. Yeah. They had the original E.T.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. So I actually played that before
it became a meme.
Before it became a meme. Before I knew.
Meme. Yeah. It just took the rest of the world a while to catch on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Before I like knew about kind of like the extreme, I'll say kind of like controversy, I guess, surrounding it. Let's go get our heart from this guy. Okay.
I always buy those the very few times I see them in like flea markets or whatever, because I feel like I'm saving it from the eternal
from the sand pit,
from the trash heap.
It's it's a terrible
the Sarlacc pit.
Well, if you know anything about it, like it's got a fascinating history, and like it's not the designer's fault really, but it's a terrible game.
Yeah, no, it's an awful
not
game.
enough like instruction for anyone to know what the fuck to do.
Yeah, I never beat it,
but it's fast. Like it just as a cultural touchstone, I think to your point earlier, it's a fascinating piece of video game history, and really sort of American technological. It's particularly like home electronic systems and shit.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Touchstone.
Yeah, and kind of like, you can see it when you're playing it, people trying to negotiate kind of like this like new medium that they're not entirely sure about. Like I think I read something where it took the guy that made it like, I want to say like two weeks or something. They gave him 2 weeks to make it, which is insanity,
Absolutely. And like he hadn't even seen the movie.
Yeah.
Right, they explained it to him. They're like, make a game about this.
Yeah, and they're like, he's like, sure, why not? So that was my first real experience with games, or at least a game console. The first game that I ever actually like really got into was Oregon Trail.
Oh wow,
cool.
Nice. Yeah. No, I think I started playing that in like first grade. So
at school?
Yeah, at school. So I was like 6 or 7, something like that. And oh man, I got really into that. Like I would just like spend entire like breaks, and like people would be like playing, and I'd just kind of like be sitting by myself, like trying to figure out how best to like get people to Oregon. And I eventually did, but it was very hard. I became, I don't know how to describe it. I think in my dissertation I describe it as the first time in my life where I ever really thought about people as like strictly instrumental objects.
Oh no, you became a little bit of a sociopath.
Yeah, I became a little bit of a sociopath. Like I stopped like naming them names and just started numbering them.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, sure. That's understandable.
That's understandable. What's less understandable is how I would set the pace to grueling early on, so I could like bump a few of them off, so that there would be like less people eating food, so I could make the food last longer. That was maybe a little much.
I think that's a really good example of like metagaming. Playing the game.
Yeah, exactly.
On itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So
and, it's interesting that you did that at such an early stage in your gaming, history. It's almost sort of, I don't want to say innate, but I guess once you get going in this I got to figure out how to break this system, you start using all of the tools available, and you're like, oh well, I could just go into the settings and turn this on. And look at here, game.
Mm-hmm.
You done got beat.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think that's something that games are really good at kind of like training people for training them to think in terms of efficiency, right? So it's really hard, I think, once you've played a game long enough to, I don't know, almost like to kind of like see like the flavor to it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
because gameplay loops are pretty short, really, core ones.
Mm-hmm.
So you get sort of you get it.
Yeah.
I feel like I've never beaten Hades, but I get Hades. I get the game. I know what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just
say I enjoy it.
Yeah. So you can just kind of like zoom through it and just kind of like, maybe not turn your brain off. It is a game that depends upon a lot of like strategizing and responding and all that kind of stuff too. Get out of there. But you can play it, I think, pretty relaxed because of that, right?
Yeah, and I think too, I think people often underestimate how difficult leisurely activities can be, outside of games. So I'm thinking of things like even crocheting or needling, needlework.
Mm-hmm.
That's really difficult. But some people, once they learn it, it can just be on in the background, right? Mm-hmm. Their fingers and their hands just kind of do it, and their brain knows what's happening, but they're still doing it. And it's very similar with video games. It's like a similarly tactile thing where your brain, once it understands kind of literally the loop
right.
of right, or the pattern of, you know, whatever it is.
I think games are particularly interesting as media and narrative medium because they are so, you know, embodied like that. Like, you know, like being able to do that, being able to crochet without looking at it is sort of this embodied knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think games are a difference of degree there at all. Maybe, I mean, sorry, a difference of kind. They might be a difference of degree, but that's to their credit. Like they're supposed to be sort of accessible in that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that I think you're absolutely right. Like games are a very physical kind of thing, right? They train you to take specific actions, to do specific things, which I think is why, you know, they're very useful for studying. Get away from me, Larry. They're very useful for kind of like, you know, studying, I think, anticipation, because anticipation is built on kind of like, you know, knowing what is about to happen, right? Or thinking that you have some kind of control over what is about to happen, or you can, again, just kind of tilt the odds in your favor and make something that you want to happen.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting thing about the code, too, because, I mean, algorithms are kind of also built around, you know, or programming is kind of built around the idea of, like, if something happens, then this can happen, right? Like, which is kind of like its own, like, programmatic way of understanding anticipation,
right?
In a sense, right? If event occurs, then all of these kinds of things occur, right? Like when you were saying nothing's completely random, it's like even random number generators in games have limits, right?
Right. They're working off sequences, right? Which is something that you can take advantage of. Like, you know, the people who are, like, you know, really good at a game are almost never really in any real danger of losing it because they know how to manipulate it. They know how to, you know, work the code or read the code, if you will.
Yeah.
In the more metaphorical sense, I suppose, but also literally, as the case may be. What am I going to go with here? Let's go with the broken spear point. It's going to make me a little bit more invulnerable. Okay. So I'm pretty good on life, so I can probably avoid all that stuff for now, and just kind of focus on getting more boons and trying to boost my critical chances.
Yeah, because you've invested a lot into those crits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've had to kind of change it a little bit because I have Aphrodite on special now, so that's where the weakness is going to come from. I hate these things, by the way.
Oh, me too. They're the worst.
These things suck. I just love that you can buy an item that makes them not appear. It's like even the devs even the devs know that these things are just really horrible to deal with. Go with perfect shot. Get some more Hermes. Can always go with more Hermes.
There isn't really a boon or a god that I dislike.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
I think they're all like really well done to like facilitate, to not hinder you too much, but also to facilitate that style of play if you want to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I really appreciate about this game, and they did a really good job with it. Pretty much every build is viable if you're good enough.
Yeah. I just don't like the gun.
Yeah, the gun is hard. I don't know. I don't really like the gun either.
But I realized just looking at like the things I had that I put a lot into Poseidon, into that aspect of Poseidon. I like moving enemies around. I think it's fun.
Yeah, Poseidon is a lot of fun. I think his dash attack in particular is really just uncommonly strong.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's anything useful. More health. Never a bad thing. Okay. So, yeah, and we're moving up. So for those of you who have never played this game, there are a few different areas that our hero, Zagreus, will travel through. This is the third of 4. This is Elysium. And at the end of this, we're going to have a boss fight against 2 guys. It's really annoying.
Yes, it is.
So I'm going to see how quickly I can do this.
And I think they're a little harder with the arrows.
Yes.
Or with the bow, yeah.
Yeah, in particular... get away from me. In particular, Theseus is much harder to deal with, I think, with the bow. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how that goes, because he can block attacks and such. Goes resistance to damage.
So you're talking about Wachamahuzi. You're talking about Oregon Trail in your dissertation. Mm-hmm. What other games are you thinking about talking about? Or have you written about, I should say?
Yeah, so I am writing about... So I've broken my dissertation up into a few different sections. I've broken it up by decades. So I mentioned before that I'm working with 80s and 90s. So for the 80s games I'm looking at Pac-Man. I'm also looking at a BBS game, or bulletin board system game, called Trade Wars. I don't know if
I'm vaguely familiar.
Yeah, so it was like one of the first, multiplayer games, and it was from the 80s, oddly enough, like networked multiplayer that you could play against, people from across the country if they were signed into it. So I'm looking at that one, and then I'm also looking at Oregon Trail.
It used a series of phone calls, right?
Yeah, you had to use modems and stuff for it.
So it was actually computer networks, not just computer aided.
Right. It was actual computer and phone networks.
Okay.
It was asynchronous multiplayer.
Right. Okay.
So you would have a bunch of people that were logging into play, but essentially only one person could play it at a time. Oddly enough.
Yeah. So they would make some sort of game state change, and then it would click over to the next person's landline or whatever.
When they were done, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So very. I'll go for this one. See, I'm getting a lot of Aries now. So the game will respond to the choices you make. If you start making choices that favor a particular deity, it will just be okay, well, you clearly want more of this guy.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
But you defied him that one round.
I did. But you still get them. I mean, they forgive you after after they get done trying to murder, trying to kill you.
Yeah.
But Trade Wars is pretty interesting. It's like a space trading game. It's very similar in a lot of ways to other space trading games that you would see nowadays, like EVE Online, was Elite Dangerous, things like that. Things that we kind of associate as being incredibly modern, is actually coming out of this really old tradition from the 80s and even the 70s in some cases. So.
Yeah, because there were radio games too, asynchronous radio games as well.
Really?
Yeah, specifically.
See,
I know that was a big thing, particularly in Eastern Europe. I think.
That sounds right. Now that I'm thinking about a different context, yeah.
Yeah. And I knew about play-by-mail games, but radio games, that's
basically ham radio kind of stuff, one-to-one communication.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Okay. Go with Urge to Kill. I also love the names of Hades stuff in this game. It's all extremely heavy metal.
I don't think I've fully done the Patroclus stuff yet.
Yeah, he's kind of sad boy supreme in this game until you get him back together with Achilles, but he gives you really good stuff. I went with the one that gives you extra attack damage for the next like 10 encounters. It gives you like plus 60 attack power, so that's going to get us through. That's going to get us through the next few fights. Yeah. I want more Artemis. So
look at that, 2 encounters for didn't have anything.
Let's see. What are you gonna give me? Not much. We'll go with Hidebreaker. All right. So this is the boss fight. This boss fight is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
It can be at least.
This is the one that I have not gotten past. I can get one of them down.
Let's see what we can do here.
And it's really not that I couldn't ever. It's just that it got really tedious. And I try pretty quick.
Totally understand that.
And that is the way that I play games.
No, I get that. I play games similarly. It's like if I get really into it, I can like pound my head against the wall. But generally speaking, anything too much, and I get a little. Yeah.
I try to make gaming like a safe space, particularly in the PhD program. So like, I'm not trying to prove anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
I just want to push buttons for a little while.
Same.
Totally get that.
And to this game's credit, it's still fun to play even when you don't win. You know, it's just like, okay, well, I was kind of done playing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It saves me a save.
But to go back to the question we were talking about. So those are the 80s games that I'm looking at. That I'm kind of thinking about. The 90s games, I'm focusing pretty strictly on strategy games. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say that that's the type of game that I most commonly play is strategy games. So these are things like Civilization 2 is one game that I'm looking at, Dune 2, Sim Earth is the other one.
Yeah. Why, just quickly, not to like throw us off, but why the focus on the 2 sequels rather than the 2 original games? Just sort of more robust systems to look at?
Sort of more robust systems. I would also say part of it is just kind of timing. Why is my call not coming out?
In terms of like their cultural impact kind of stuff, like the way that they're marketed and received and that kind of thing?
Not necessarily. Part of it is just strictly like periodization. Like they come out kind of like at a time that works for kind of like the era that I'm looking at. As far as Dune 2 goes, it's kind of interesting. It's not actually a sequel to anything. They just called it. They just called it Dune 2.
So I'm guessing like for copyright stuff.
To the movie, to the book.
Yeah, it's like supposed to be like
is it a movie tie-in?
So it's not a movie tie-in. It's not even really like a. It's not even really like a book tie-in. It's apparently in the lore. It's supposed to be like a prequel to Dune. Oddly enough, so the fact that they called it Dune 2 is kind of strange. However, I will say this.
Somebody clearly didn't go back and check the like title form. With gold. They're just like, I thought you looked at that. We had a whole meeting, George.
This was supposed to be taken care of, But I think part of it, what happened too, is that there was apparently like an adventure game that came out for Sega Genesis that came out like a month before Dune 2 was, and they realized that it was going to come out first, and they're like, oh well, we need to like differentiate our product, so they decided to call it Dune 2.
Kind of like Troll 2. Huh.
Yeah,
same thing happened.
Yeah, very similar to Troll 2. Let's see if we can get something here.
Also in execution, though? Is Dune 2 good?
Dune 2 is very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is exactly what I was hoping to get. So your critical effects deal more damage to weak foes. So those crits that have been popping up every so often, they're about to get even bigger. And we're going to get more money from more purchases. So anyway, I'm looking at those games for for a couple of different reasons. Strategy games in general for a couple of different reasons. The first is that they almost always, strategy games do, they present space that has to be managed in some sense. Mm-hmm. And really games in general are all about kind of like management. The management of weapons, the management of life, the management of space. And these games are very much kind of like all about that I'm looking at, right? And again, to kind of go back to what I was saying earlier, if you're managing a space, ultimately what you're doing is you're trying to understand kind of like, how that space can be learned in some sense. Right?
Measured. Right?
Measured.
Yeah.
Yes, measured, exactly. It's a
and
great
then
way of saying
responded to.
Measured, responded to, made, I'll say, made knowable,
Yeah.
So that's part of, anticipation as well, right? Is if you can understand a space, you can measure it, and you can eventually dictate what happens in it, right?
Yeah.
That's so... I don't know, man.
That's cool.
So it's a lot. It's a lot. It's very hard to talk about.
Well, it's a little. I mean, it's a little. It's a little grim, don't you think?
Yeah, certainly.
It's a little. I don't know. Very modern way of like looking at the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. This And by the way, just for the folks at home, we're trying to get some food to feed to this boy right here, so he'll get out of our way. We can't attack him; he's our dog.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're right. It is a very grim way, and I think that's definitely something that I've kind of like struggled with a little bit. It's like, okay, it's very easy, I think, to read these games, particularly like strategy games, in terms of like, I'll say the most kind of like cynical reading of them, mm-hmm. which is to say, they're all about kind of like the reification of capitalism. They're all about kind of like colonialism and dominating space and exterminating enemies and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely want to leave space for games to surprise us and offer, kind of like means of resisting that. And I think that's where, you mentioned metagames before. I mean, I think that's where metagames can really kind of like come into that because, games can do other things than kind of like what you're supposed to be, quote, supposed to be doing in them, right? There's nothing stopping you from playing Hades in such a way where, you are never really trying to get out, that, you're basically doing how fast can I get Zagreus back home?
Yeah.
Right? It's a strange way to play, but hey, if that's your thing, that's what you're in for, right?
It sort of gets to Judith Butler is sort of the core of this idea, but and it's not T.L. Taylor, but the queer are failing in
Ruberg. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruberg. Mm. I knew you could help me. And just the idea that there's not one sort of monolithic goal in mind when play is sort of on the table.
Right.
It can take the form of anything.
And I think too, if we want to say that about games, it's like, well, the novel helped form the perfect Victorian subject in England. And we all survived that.
Mm-hmm. We can get out of this.
Did we though?
No, but
did we?
But yeah, I think the criticism the criticism is there, but also the idea that somehow this whole batch of things that are programmed by however you want to define a game has one purpose and one purpose only. Is I would say also short-sighted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also say, just as a side note as well, I think a lot of it too is that these games, they really, or at least the games that I'm looking at, they're kind of like occurring at a moment where the idea that they can be played somehow I gotta put this, that they can be played somehow other than the way they're meant to be played, isn't really being fleshed out yet, right? Like they're kind of like the games themselves are kind of like encouraging you to approach them in a particular way.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
What's impending doom?
Are you familiar with Espen Orset's cybertext? Well, actually, I don't know if this is in cybertext, but he wrote it around the same time. But anyway, his idea of aporia and an epiphany being sort of a... I mean, essentially, he's talking about cybertext, hypertexts, like text-based things. But it's the idea that the experience is a sort of constructed, orchestrated balance between making it feel having a player or reader bounce against boundaries in this sort of near frustration, and that's the aporia, and then to all of a sudden come to a conclusion, and that's the epiphany, and that's I'm sort of straw manning his argument, but that's supposed to be sort of the motivating force to get a reader to go through a participatory medium.
Makes sense to me. And I think too, like, a lot of the games that I'm looking at, they are kind of like, emerging, I would say, in a social, almost died, just died there, it's okay, I can come back. They are emerging in a, I'll say, social context where, a lot of people are kind of like transitioning from, I'll say, like a more kind of, a more kind of like hard economy to a more kind of like speculative economy, right? Where their job is no longer producing things, but managing things.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it doesn't surprise me that just as you're kind of like, in the 80s, the 70s and 80s in particular, that just as you are kind of like seeing this transition from that hard economy to that more speculative economy, from that production economy to this, kind of like management economy, which arises out of, kind of like the more widespread use of computers and digital technologies, that games, which are made by people who are, essentially like really hooked into these, like, digital technologies, kind of reflects that managerial turn.
Yeah.
Right. So I think when I'm kind of like, approaching them from that perspective, I think part of it is just kind of like, I'll go with this. I don't know what Mia does. I think part of it is just kind of like, recognizing that there is that kind of like tendency, that really strong tendency kind of within those games, right? But yeah, I do still struggle with the idea of like how to militate or how to kind of like work against that in some ways.
Yeah.
It might just be a future project,
Yeah. I think too, like materially, a lot of games develop kind of out of spreadsheets in a way. Like a lot of games come out of the same, the same technology that facilitates the kind of, the kind of managerial class that we're talking about.
What is a game if not a management of contingency, right? To get back to Malaby full circle moment.
Yeah,
right?
and
so
the
like,
two... Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Well, we're talking about even not digital games.
Yeah.
It's to manage contingency. So then when we bring in digital architectures for this management of contingencies, we sort of get into this, neoliberal platform capitalist vectorless class sort of...
Right. And
shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look at this, like, what is this if not a spreadsheet? Like, I see my fiery presence, all these kinds of things up here that I'm having to manage.
And what's playing a game if not being able to sort of interpret that, right? This sort of reading of the code.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I think too, historically, game development comes out of the army, the military, right? But also the two most dominant countries, the U.S. and Japan at the time, right? Those two countries in the 70s and 80s are going through not the same, but very similar economic shifts, where neither of them are really focusing on production as much anymore. Especially Japan is really going towards a service and a cultural production economy at the time. So like that makes sense too. That it's all being in the nations where that's happening. These are being produced.
That's not to say that there wasn't great games coming out of Europe.
No, not at all.
Eastern Europe, and
Tetris.
Yeah, Russia, of course. Which is a fascinating documentary on the Tetris murders. Have you guys seen that?
Tetris,
it's a crazy story.
Oh man,
It's
I love Tetris.
It's everything you can imagine, involving like KGB and just let your imagination run wild.
Oh, yeah.
Check it out. It's on one of the streaming things. I can't remember which one. Google it.
I will definitely have to do that.
I mean, our viewers, but
I mean, I want to.
I'm not sure we have any. Oh, it's me.
That's okay. That happened with lunch. We had 3 viewers at one point.
It's all about the VOD.
Yeah.
So here we are. We are trying to defeat our dads so we can leave.
Perfect timing too. You're gonna get this in under an hour.
No,
well, particularly because we started late. But...
Okay. He can summon a lot of things, and as you can see, he's very annoying to fight against. He has a really nasty surprise, which I will definitely get out.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know.
For those of you who don't know, he has a pretty nasty surprise, so be on the lookout for this.
Is that it?
No.
Nope.
His like AoE attack is just so big, like that. It's
Christmas lights.
That's big.
Have you played any of other Supergiants games?
I tried, but I bounced off of. I think it was. I forget what it was called.
Bastion?
Fire, I think it was.
Oh, Pyre. Pyre is very different than this game.
Yeah,
that's one I haven't tried.
Yeah, I bounced off that one pretty hard.
Justified.
Yeah, because Bastion is very similar to this, as is Transistor. I really enjoy Transistor, but there's only one weapon really that you can use in Transistor, so like it's a much slower game.
Yeah, for sure. So it's
but I like it.
Bastion has like a neat narrative thing, much like you could tell that the developers are interested in the various ways that narrative works in games.
Yeah, yeah, very much about the integration there. So yeah, he comes back. You beat him, and he decides that he's not done, and he wants to hurt you.
And then all these jars are trying to grab you and
Jersey?
bring you back to hell.
Mm-hmm. So we'll see if I
thought it was pretty cool to hear that Hades 2 is actually takes place in heaven and
are trying to go down.
No, I don't know.
Oh no, but it is you trying to go down into hell.
Oh, no kidding! You really do play as someone in heaven?
I don't know if I think you're on Earth.
Oh, okay.
Technically, or whatever their version of Earth.
You keep dying, and they keep sending you back. Like that's kind of funny. Like no, you can't be dead. I'm gonna insist that you live again.
Yeah, apparently it's all about like time and stuff. So I'll be.
Yeah, it's like the villain isn't Hades, it's Kronos.
Oh, cool.
Hug your dad to win.
I was waiting for it.
Oh, I hate that attack.
It's 4:00, so we could maybe. I mean, it's not to put any more pressure.
No,
on you,
this is
wrapping up as you put the finishing touches on. So, just to get to some more of our questions, do games and/or play have a role in your work or interests?
Sounds like it.
I'm kidding.
I'm gonna say provisionally. Yes,
we do have that on our list because we have to be reminded to say that.
Provisionally.
Yes. I did want to ask if you have any of the work that you've done on your dissertation, like publishable or readable anywhere.
Publishable or readable?
Like a blog or in the works to being published. Where can we get our hands on this?
Well, as of right now, I got killed him, by the way.
And we're in Hades' good graces now.
Yeah.
So now he hated us at first, but now we're on.
He's cool with us killing.
Cool.
him.
Yeah.
So nowhere to read it right now. I can email it to you. I am looking eventually at publishing chapters of my dissertation.
Sure. Yeah.
And I will definitely be on the socials about that when I do. I'll tweet y'all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was Hades. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks so much,
Randolph. This was really fun. This is great.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing this every week. Next week, we're interviewing another of the graduate student here working at C21. And yeah, we'll go from there and talk some more. So thank you for we have a couple of viewers who joined us, so thank you very much.
Yeah,
thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.